My name is Crispian Olver. I'm the Executive Director, which means I run the administration of the Presidential Climate Commission. And we're a multi-stakeholder body appointed by our President 3 years ago. And we advise on the pathway to net zero, which needs to be a socially just transition. So the Climate Commission's origin was in the Job Summit of 2018, and that's a moment in South Africa's history where all of our social partners came together to discuss the very high unemployment levels that we have in this country. It's a crisis of unemployment. And many of the discussions at the summit drew on the ILO guidelines around the just transition and a lot of the thinking on the just transition that had come out of the labour movement. So one of the recommendations of the summit was to set up this multi-stakeholder body that would be advising about this transition and what are the social and labour market and industrial policy measures that we need to protect workers and communities. So as a commission, our first order of work was to work on a policy framework that spells out what is the just transition, what does it mean concretely, and what are the different actions that we want stakeholders to undertake. So we launched a very comprehensive stakeholder engagement program. We've got all of these stakeholders represented on the commission, so there was very active debate inside the commission, but we didn't pretend that that was the sum total of the consultation that needs to happen. So we reached out into every corner of the country. We particularly went and spoke to areas of the country that are going to be impacted by this transition earlier than others. So like the coal belt in the Mpumalanga province was a big focus for consultations. And we also did in-depth work with each of the main stakeholder groups. So business, labour, community, faith leaders, local government people, young people. We involved all of them in this conversation. So it's a bit like, we're building a wedding cake. It was a multi-level stakeholder engagement process. And that culminated in 2022. We adopted this framework. Very close, by the way. I mean, you'll see a lot of the origins linked to the ILO guidelines. There are a lot of the concepts there that we took on board. We also expanded the concept in some interesting ways, bringing in adaptation and resilience themes, for instance. And then once we'd adopted the framework as the commission, we took it to the president. And through the president, took it to cabinet. We briefed the cabinet on the framework. And we were very pleased when the national cabinet adopted this framework without amendment. So they basically took our work and enshrined it in government policy in South Africa. Yeah, well, the core to any successful framework is the extent to which the social partners take it on board and implement it themselves. So it was a big milestone getting government to adopt the framework. We've also, we needed to do no real work with the Labour constituency because they had already embraced the idea of a just transition. But we've obviously had in-depth engagements with Labour to make sure that all of the policy instruments are targeted and are going to have maximum impact in terms of protecting jobs, helping workers to transition, skilling them, etc. The real work has been on the employer side, so getting the big employer organizations, the mining companies, the big industrial businesses, the emerging sectors like renewable energy and green hydrogen and battery technologies, getting all of them to embrace this idea and to factor it in to their own business strategies. So that's been, I would say, a work in progress. I don't want to claim a sort of kumbaya moment where all employers have signed on to this progressive charter, but we see it as part of an ongoing engagement. So, for us, consultation doesn't have a start and end date. It's an ongoing process. It's about getting all of the right people at the decision-making table, and that needs ongoing multi-level stakeholder engagement. So the processes that I've been describing are not easy, and different constituencies come to the table with very different mindsets, with very different ideological orientations and reference points. So it takes a lot of work to get stakeholders onto the same page in a way that they can have a practical conversation that leads to a concrete outcome. Those were the challenges, but I think with persistence you can overcome them and move forward.
When we speak about just transition, it's not just terminology. These are people's livelihoods. These are people's lives. Workers specifically in communities have centered their lives around a particular power station, whether it be Hendrina or Komati or any of those. And the issue here is coming in and telling people that what you've known all your life can possibly harm you, in relation to the impacts of climate change. And wanting to speak to issues of just transition with a certain narrative in the media that, South Africa is borrowing this much money, they're trying to sell us to the highest bidder. Speaking to workers who have already been influenced by the myths and the dispels of just transition is very difficult. It's very difficult to get into a community that has an entire economy based on fossil fuels and telling them that we need to look at alternatives. So I think that's the most difficult part. And also just, the most challenging parts of this just transition work, I think, was for me, especially when I started going into Mpumalanga. It's very different getting into a province that is already feeling the impacts, but is already transitioning. So workers there are really, they are reluctant to engaging. They're very closed off, and you need a specific approach to be able to speak to workers that are that vulnerable without making them feel like their entire lives are going to collapse. And it is through the blueprints that we also kind of try to give alternatives that workers can look at, that workers can look forward to, and just to ensure that they know that there will be that safety net, because we are demanding for social protection. We are demanding for adequate housing, we're demanding for universal basic income grant, and we are demanding an end to this austerity so that you can be able to survive. Those are the difficulties. I think mostly telling someone whose bread and butter is based on that actual activity in the economy is very difficult. And it takes a level of understanding, connection, and empathy, because people are really scared. You can't just look at it on an environmental perspective, which is very important, and we don't dispel or disagree on that, but these are people's jobs that at some point we need to ensure that they're not led into unemployment. And
There is definitely a widespread understanding that greenhouse gases and local emissions must definitely be reduced. But we do find that none of that will happen without providing adequate funding. I think we speak about that at length when it comes to the problem of resourcing, especially towards the global south. We definitely need to invest in creating more awareness, especially within industry, and especially with industries that are affected within the ecosystem. When it comes to addressing barriers, we need to put more energy into that, especially when it comes to fostering a more supportive ecosystem. And this is an ecosystem that would be supportive in terms of allowing employers to come to the fore, but also supporting at the same time the rights of employees with a very balanced approach. Ensuring that Africa becomes an investment hub for clean energy definitely needs to be at the top of the agenda, considering that marginalized countries need investment but also need a sustainable amount of corporate responsibility from the international community to make sure that Africa, number one, is not left behind, but also that the requisite support with the amount of transparency and sustainability needed is there. There definitely can be animosity around just energy transition discussions, particularly because of their intensity, but also because of the current economic issues in the world, especially within the labor market. So those definitely exacerbate the intensity of the discussions and the conversations, and understandably so, because workers do feel a fear of unemployment and displacement, and those fears definitely need to be attended to, and the skilling issues as well when it comes to the workers that need to be upskilled, the amount of skills transference that actually needs to take place. So when it comes to skills as an ecosystem, but also a broader issue, those discussions are also taking place, but they do need to take place on a deeper level, but also on a very broader level. We also are encountering the issue that there is limited best practice, because for the most part, this part in this discussion of industry is quite new to the continent. Therefore, there definitely needs to be capacitation, support building, especially among communities that need to be sensitized to the details, as well as what exactly is needed to achieve a just energy transition. For employers, definitely, and not just in the just energy transition space, we do find that there needs to be a whole lot more of alignment between the policies and the legislations that are coming to aid and abet the functioning and the operation of industry, as well as the actual implementation on the ground. We definitely do think that cognitive dissonance is definitely playing into some of the intensities and the difficulties, especially around the conversation between workers and employers. And once those are fixed, we definitely do think we can head towards a more sustainable path. So across sectors, and definitely across other ILO supported interventions, and even across other thematic areas, the need for alignment between policy and legislation and agreements that are put onto paper, as well as the actual work on the ground with respect to implementation, inspection, rolling out of projects, and rolling out of regulations that see to the applicability of that legislation is incredibly important.